Okay, seatbelts, everybody. We're going to go on a little mental road trip here. So pick whatever car you want, or fancy truck. Maybe it's a Tesla, whatever you want. And who knows, maybe for some of you it's nighttime and the music is blasting and the windows are down and the air is blowing through your hair. Or maybe for some of you, you're alone in the morning. It's really early in the morning and it's quiet, very few sounds except for the tires maybe bumping and finding a rhythm on the asphalt. And as you're driving along, who knows, you maybe start to wonder about that special somebody. Or maybe you're freaking out because you don't have something done for work or for school, thinking about all sorts of things. You glance into the rearview mirror, check your teeth, check your hair, check your makeup, ladies. And who knows, maybe you're thinking about what's going to happen next in that book you're reading. But then suddenly you realize that 20 minutes have gone by and you think, oh shit, I don't know who's been driving, but it wasn't me. And you can't believe that you didn't take out a whole bunch of cars and trees along the way. So who of you has been there? When you drive, maybe you get to work and you realize that you weren't really paying attention that whole time. Sometimes our brain just flat out goes into autopilot. And in some ways, it's really pretty incredible what the brain is capable of once it's been shown the ropes, right? And in this particular case, autopilot was most definitely a good thing. But autopilot, I don't think, is always a good thing. Sometimes autopilot can tend to kick into gear on a broader level and kind of seep into your everyday life. I mean, do any of you feel like you're ever just going through the motions? Same job, same routine, day in, day out. And it can get all of us. Even some of the most punk rock among us can fall into going through the motions. And I think it's safe to say that going through the motions in life has obvious downsides when it comes to morale at the very least, right? But it can also have a downside when it comes to education and brain development. Going through the motions and doing things over and over has some very clear benefits, and it has some very clear downsides as well. And today we're going to walk through these things and find out when it's good and when it's bad. Now, I'm a speech therapist, so I'm going to be talking about how all of this applies to helping your child with their speech. But I think that anybody who's listening will find that this could be applied to just about any area where you want your child to change their behaviors or learn new things and just generalize new information. It's all about carving out clear, well-defined pathways in your brain while also keeping your brain on its toes. So anyway, let's get going. Keep your ears on the radio, but your eyes on the road, because it's time to chat. Have you ever heard of neuroplasticity? If you haven't, it's kind of what it sounds like neurons for the brain, plasticity, like plastic. So it's essentially the brain's ability to be plastic-like or changeable, movable. And in this case, it's the brain's actual ability to carve out literal pathways in the brain so it can transfer information from one area of the brain to the other. It's kind of like, I don't know, have you ever been camping and maybe tried to carve in a stick, like a straight line down a stick? And when you first try to start carving, it can be difficult, especially if you have a bumpy stick. Try to go down the line in the exact spot where you want to carve. At first, you might end up going off in various directions around the line that you want. But eventually, once you go down a certain path over and over, you start to find that groove. And the line gets deeper and deeper, and it's easier to travel down that path and keep carving and go exactly where you want to go. So establishing pathways in the brain is similar to that. In order to get good at something, you have to do it over and over again to start carving out these pathways in your brain. So, the next time that you're having a hard time doing something new, give yourself a break because you're literally having to carve out pathways in your brain. Now, one thing to realize here is that a child's brain is much more plastic. It is much easier to carve out pathways in a child's brain than it is an older person's brain. For a kid's brain, it's more like carving in, soap or butter. But as you age, it does get harder to carve out new pathways. I know for me, it certainly is. I feel like it's more like carving through oak or something when I'm trying to learn something new. But once you get those pathways going, amazing things can happen. It's like if you've ever watched Eric Clapton play guitar or some virtuoso on the piano. I'm sure you found yourself saying, how in the world do they do that so effortlessly? Now, of course, we know that it was not effortless at all, that they had to spend years and years of doing things over and over again. But because they did, for them, now it is relatively effortless because they have these such strong pathways in their brain. Now, most of the rest of this podcast is going to be about breaking away from norms, not doing things over and over again. But here is actually a good time to point out where doing something over and over again can be beneficial when it comes to speech. If and when you can get your child to practice speech and essentially drill, so practicing their sounds over and over again or saying words with their sounds in it over and over again, this is a case where it actually would be very helpful because you are essentially carving out these new pathways. And each time you practice, those pathways get a little bit deeper and a little bit longer, a little bit stronger. So, whether you know it or not, speech is actually a very intricate and complex process. And it only happens automatically because we've literally been doing it our entire lives pretty much. There's actually this video of somebody talking while being x-rayed, and it shows how all the articulators move as they speak, and it's actually really mind-blowing. I just saw it I think maybe about a month ago, and I'm a speech therapist, and I was blown away by it. I'll put a link to it in the description of this podcast, or you can search something to the effects of MRI scan shows what happens to the body when people talk and sing. I don't know, it's a big, long title. But it's worth checking out, and the person is speaking in German, but you'll get the idea. So, nobody likes drill, especially kids, but if you can get them to do it, it's definitely worth it. I think of gymnasts and watching them fly through the air so amazingly and landing on their feet, and it's like, how in the world did they do this? Well, it's because they did things over and over again, and they probably fell on their faces more than they would like to admit. And they probably didn't like it. They didn't like doing it over and over again, but they definitely liked the end result, right? So when it comes to practicing speech, start digging out those pathways. So, it's really interesting. Through the years, more often than not, if I'm working with a kid, towards later on in the process of therapy, a kid will be able to say a particular sound in structured activities. So if we're kind of helping them. Or during drill, they can say their sounds. But when it comes to generalizing, saying it in a natural conversation, it's not always so easy. But inevitably, it seems like they'll show up one day and suddenly it's in their speech. It's like a switch just got flipped. And suddenly they'll start using speech with the correct sound, as if that new pathway just got easier to travel down than the old one. So that is most definitely where doing something over and over again can most decidedly be helpful. But now let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about doing things differently and breaking out of the monotony, because it really can make a big difference. First, I want to paint a picture of this speech therapy world that I've been working in for nearly 20 years. We do have a very typical cookie cutter model for how to treat children with speech difficulties. And, this model has been around, for decades at least, but probably since, close to the dawn of speech therapy. And, there's plenty of success within it. Don't get me wrong. Therapists and children make a lot of progress every day. But I do feel like it's working a little less and less within our modern day setup. Because, a lot has changed in the last 20 years, but not much has changed when it comes to the model for speech therapy. I mean, schools, insurance, and certainly not your kids. None of those things have a hard time shaking it up for you, right? So now it's your turn. It's your turn to start shaking things up and take control. So here's how things go down in the speech therapy world. Generally, a child is identified by somebody, generally in the school, as having a delay. Then weeks or sometimes months go by before the child really even gets tested. At this point, a speech therapist gives a standardized test or compares the child's speech to normative data, and then hopefully, if they need the help, they'll be qualified. But then, in today's society, a child then has to wait another couple months to actually start therapy. By the time schools get into gear or insurance actually does what it's supposed to do, it can take a while. From there, once therapy is going, a child is generally seen by a speech therapist 1 to 2 times a week for 30 minutes. I mean, I've seen those words right there thousands of times in my life. In the public schools, the kid is usually grouped with numerous other kids too. So, with any luck, most children that are identified with speech delays, they might get services after a few months. And once they do, they're lucky to get 20 to 30 minutes of direct attention a week. From here, if the child is sent home with practice material, it's rare that the parents have time or make time to practice what is needed to help their kids. So here we have a model where we lose months of potential attention to issues due in large part to bureaucracy in the schools, followed by a model where it's kind of just expected, where parents will just hand off their kid to a speech therapist and say, here you go, fix my kid. And they continue on with their busy lives. And then your child is expected to make progress in really this small amount of time with just a couple hours a month of attention. Now, this is not to say that kids, being the clever and resilient creatures that they are, don't still make progress. They do. But if the platform were to be changed, I'm telling you, crucial developmental time wouldn't be lost. Children would make much quicker progress. And in many cases, if you kind of follow some of these things from the time your kid is born, these problems can be avoided altogether. So what is happening here is filled with good people. They're working hard, yourself and your kids included. But I think everybody just sort of gets stuck in playing their roles a little bit. And like I said, plenty of progress can be made. But I'm telling you right now, if you want your kids to make progress and be affected by speech issues as little as possible, then changing your role can and will make a huge difference. And, ultimately you only have control over your role anyway. You can't really change the bureaucracy. I mean, there's things you could do, but that's a conversation for a different podcast altogether. So what are you going to do to change your role? There are things that you can do that I promise that will blow your mind or melt your heart or both. I mean, you'll find yourself proud of your kids and also saying, yay, humans, because some of it really feels like magic. I mean, it does to me, and I've been doing this for a better part of 2 decades. To really start shaking things up, there's 2 things that you need to do. Number 1, you got to tweak the way that you interact with your kids. And 2, you need to be an idiot. That's right, a dork. You need to be strange and do things that are odd and out of the ordinary with your kid. You gotta let loose and be goofy. And, if people see you being odd and strange, just tell them that your kid's speech therapist told you that you had to do it. You have an excuse now. So let's start with tweaking the way you interact with your kid. Notice I said tweak and not add. Now, I'm the parent of 3 kids myself, so I know how hectic things can be with kids. I mean, Lord, child, please don't add one more thing to my day. As it is, I don't get everything done, and in between, breaking up fights with the kids and pulling marbles out of their noses, the last thing I want to do is have to sit down and do one more thing. And, especially for something that I didn't go to school for, like speech therapy. But I need to let you in on a little secret about articulation therapy. It's really not rocket science. Sorry, speech therapists, I don't mean to sell you out here, but once you kind of know what to look for, it's not that difficult. I think about it like playing music on a guitar. If somebody played a C note for me over a radio or something and told me to play it, there's no way that I would be able to know. I just don't have that musical ear. But if somebody who did have that ear said, oh, that's a C note, and showed me where to place my fingers and how to strum the guitar, I could learn how to do it relatively easy. So think about speech therapy like that. Once you know what to do and how to do it, you can really do a pretty decent job, certainly enough to make a big difference with your child. Don't think about speech therapists like a heart surgeon. If, God forbid, your child ever needed heart surgery, you would want a heart surgeon and only a heart surgeon to do the surgery. It's not like you'd step in and say, hey, doc, can I help out? What do you need? But speech therapy isn't like this. It really needs to be a group effort. To keep with the music theme, the therapist here is the songwriter, and you're a band member. The therapist knows what to listen for and can put all the notes and instruments together and then teach everybody else what to play. But you as a parent have got to be part of the band. You may not be John Lennon, but you're Ringo. You're Ringo, man. I mean, you're keeping the beat. It's really hard to stay on task and on the mark without Ringo. So hop on that kit and get playing.